I remember the day I first arrived in Blackwater Creek. The town seemed to be in a perpetual state of mourning, shrouded in fog that clung to everything like a damp shroud. The marshlands stretched out in every direction, their waters dark and uninviting. As a botanist, I found it exhilarating, a treasure trove of undiscovered plant life, untouched by modern hands. But there was something else there too, something that pricked at the edges of my mind, like an itch I couldn't quite scratch. My cabin sat on the outskirts of town, near the swamp's edge. It was quaint, rustic, and isolated, exactly what I needed to focus on my work. The first few days passed uneventfully as I cataloged various flora, marveling at the resilience of life in such an inhospitable environment. I noticed the locals watched me with a strange mix of curiosity and wariness, their conversation stopping abruptly whenever I approached. At first, I chalked it up to small-town insularity. A week into my stay, I met Ethan. He was brought to my workshop by Mr. Greaves, a grizzled man with sunken eyes and a voice like gravel. Thought maybe you'd let the boy help out. Greaves said, his gaze darting around my workspace. Build his confidence. Ethan was awkward, avoiding eye contact and mumbling responses to my questions. Yet, there was a sharpness in his observations as he carefully handled specimens, pointing out details I had overlooked. He had an innate intelligence, buried under layers of shyness. I found myself looking forward to his visits, even if they were sporadic. Then, the gifts started appearing. I found them on my doorstep, bundles of dried marsh plants tied with twine, small vials filled with a viscous, amber-like resin. At first, I assumed they were from Ethan. Perhaps it was his way of thanking me for including him. But when I mentioned it casually during one of his visits, he froze, his face draining of color. "It's not me," he said in a hushed voice. Before I could press further, Mr. Greaves interjected, his tone sharp. "The marsh demands respect," he muttered. His words sent a chill down my spine, though I couldn't explain why. That night, I was woken by whispers outside my cabin. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the voices were too distinct, too human. I crept to the window, peering into the fog-drenched darkness. Nothing. Still, the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I didn't sleep much after that. The whispers became a nightly occurrence. Sometimes, they were accompanied by soft rustling, as though something was moving through the underbrush. One evening, my curiosity got the better of me. Armed with a flashlight, I stepped outside, following the sound. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the ground squelched under my boots as I ventured closer to the swamp's edge. That's when I saw him, Mr. Greaves, kneeling in the mud, his head bowed as he whispered fervently. Before him stood a figure, half submerged in the bog. At first, I thought it was a man, but as my flashlight beam landed on it, I realized how wrong I was. Its body was twisted and sinewy, like the gnarled roots of a tree. Its face was featureless save for a wide, gaping mouth that seemed to pulsate as though drawing in the very essence of the night. "Lucy," Greaves said, his voice trembling with reverence, "meet the guardian of Blackwater." I stumbled back, my heart pounding as the creature turned its head toward me. Those moments were a blur of terror as I ran, tripping over roots and nearly losing my footing in the muck. I barely made it back to my cabin, slamming the door shut and locking it. My breath came in ragged gasps as I pressed my back against the door, listening. Minutes passed, then hours. Nothing happened. The next day, I tried to tell the authorities. They listened politely, their faces impassive, but it was clear they didn't believe me. When I mentioned Ethan, their expressions darkened. "The marsh always takes its due," one of them said cryptically. Days later, Ethan went missing. His absence gnawed at me. I asked Mr. Greaves about him, but he just shook his head, muttering something about the will of the marsh. Desperate for answers, I ventured into the swamp again, this time during daylight, but the bog seemed to have swallowed every trace of the boy. The only thing I found was one of the amber vials, half buried in the mud. Inside, something wriggled. That night, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. Shadows moved just beyond the edge of the fog, and I knew that the bogman was out there, watching, waiting. The thought of those gaping jaws sent me into a panic. I grabbed my truck keys and left, speeding down the winding road out of Blackwater Creek, the fog closing in behind me like a living thing. Even now, miles away, I can't escape it. My dreams are haunted by the marsh, by the figure rising from bog, by Ethan's silent screams, by Mr. Greaves's whispered prayers. The gift stopped when I left, but sometimes I find myself waking in the dead of night, the faint scent of decay lingering in the air, and I know deep down that the marsh isn't done with me yet. They called it Graven Hollow, a place forgotten by time and cloaked in an endless shroud of snow and ice. I had lived in the village my whole life, and its secrets were as familiar to me as my own heartbeat, or so I thought. There was always talk of the Graven Mine, and the stories that swirled around it like the biting winds that howled through the valley. Most were dismissed as ghost stories meant to keep kids from wandering too far, but one tale clung stubbornly to the edges of truth and fear, the legend of the Howler. It was one of those stories that never faded, passed down like a curse from one generation to the next. They said the Howler was no man, no animal. Something far worse, something born of the mind's dark depths. It preyed on those foolish enough to venture too deep, and its cries could freeze the blood in your veins. As kids, we used to dare each other to step just inside the mine's entrance, but none of us ever made it far. Until that night, there were 4 of us: Ethan, Clara, Mason, and Priya. Ethan was always the leader, the one with a reckless streak and an endless supply of bravado. Clara was his perfect foil, cautious but curious, her logical mind always trying to explain away the unexplainable. Mason masked his fear with jokes and laughter, though his hands would always tremble at the worst moments. And Priya? She was a quiet one, the one who always seemed to sense things the rest of us couldn't. I don't know why I agreed to Ethan's dare that night. Maybe it was the thrill of it, the chance to prove that the Howler was just another story. We set out after dusk, the sky a slate of swirling gray. Each of us carried a lantern, their flickering light casting long, dancing shadows against the snow-laden trees as we trekked toward the mine. The forest felt alive in a way that made my skin crawl. Every snap of a branch, every rustle of the wind felt deliberate, as if unseen eyes were watching. But Ethan led the way, his steps confident, his grin unwavering. "It's just a hole in the ground," he said over his shoulder. "What's there to be scared of?" The mine's entrance loomed before us like the gaping maw of some ancient beast, its wooden beams sagging under the weight of years and neglect. The air that seeped out was colder than the forest, sharp, metallic, and faintly rotten. "Still think it's just a hole?" Mason quipped, his voice wavering. "Come on," Ethan said. Ignoring him, he stepped inside, and one by one we followed. The darkness swallowed us whole, the lanterns barely cutting through the thick, oppressive black. The walls glistened with moisture, and the ground was uneven, littered with rusted tools and splintered wood. The deeper we went, the heavier the air became, pressing down on us like a physical weight. At first, it was silent except for our footsteps and the occasional drip of water echoing through the shafts. But then we heard it. It started as a low, guttural growl, so faint I thought I'd imagined it. But when I glanced at the others, their wide eyes told me they'd heard it too. "Just the wind," Mason said, though his grip on the lantern tightened. The sound came again, louder this time, resonating through the tunnels like a living thing. It wasn't the wind. We came to a massive cavern, its ceiling lost in shadows. Our lanterns revealed jagged rock walls, and, in the center, a pile of something that turned my stomach. Bones. Hundreds of them, gnawed and broken, intermingled with scraps of clothing. Priya froze at the entrance, her face pale as death. "I'm not going any further," she whispered. "Stay here," Ethan said, his voice steady, though his eyes betrayed his unease. He and Clara moved closer, their lanterns illuminating more of the grisly scene. I hung back, torn between following and fleeing. That's when we saw it. From the shadows at the edge of the cavern, it emerged. A hulking figure, impossibly large, its form more shadow than substance. Its eyes glowed a sickly yellow, piercing through the darkness, and where its face should have been, there was only a gaping maw, jagged and wet, emitting a low, pulsating growl that seemed to vibrate through my very bones. The Howler. Ethan and Clara froze, their lanterns trembling in their hands. Mason let out a strangled cry and stumbled backward, his elbow catching the edge of my lantern. It tumbled to the ground, shattering, and the flames licked hungrily at the dry wooden beams lining the cavern. "Run!" someone screamed. Maybe it was me, maybe all of us at once. Chaos erupted. The fire spread quickly, illuminating the cavern in a flickering orange glow. The howler let out a scream, a sound so agonized, so inhuman, that it felt like needles driving into my ears. We turned and ran, the tunnel collapsing around us as the fire consumed everything in its path. I could hear Priya sobbing behind me, her footsteps faltering. Mason grabbed her arm, dragging her forward as rocks and debris rained down. We reached the mine's entrance just as the ceiling gave way entirely, sealing the cavern with a thunderous roar. Silence followed, broken only by our ragged breathing. We had made it out, but the nightmare wasn't over. As we stood there, staring at the rubble, Ethan swore he saw something. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. There, amidst the wreckage, two glowing yellow eyes watched us, unblinking, unyielding. "It's still in there," Ethan muttered, his voice barely audible. None of us responded. What could we say? The howler wasn't just a story. It was real, and it was still alive. We left grave in mind that night, but it never truly left us. The howler's scream haunted my dreams, a reminder of the darkness that lurks in forgotten places. And sometimes on the coldest nights, when the wind howls through the valley, I'd swear I could hear it calling me back.